All right, looks like we are live, everybody, and I want to welcome you to the show today. We've got a very exciting debate. I am pumped for this. Today we are debating, are the 10 Commandments ethical? And we've got Michael, the Canadian Atheist, and CJ Cox with us today. Looks like we've already got a great chat. Make sure throughout the debate you are tagging me with your questions, as we will have an audience Q&A following the discussion today. It's going to be more of a free-flowing dialogue in terms of structure for this afternoon's debate. We will be having roughly 5 to 10 minute opening statements, but then we're going to go right into a discussion. So let's waste no time at all. I am going to bring the guests in to the studio. Michael and CJ, gentlemen, good to have you here. Thanks for giving us your time for this afternoon's debate.
Thanks so much for having us. It's great.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure. Light you up. I think this is sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, yeah, well, probably the same thing you were going to say, CJ. I think this is the first time for both of you here on the channel on Standing for Truth. So that being said, I want to kind of break the ice just for people who might not be familiar with who you are or your channels or podcasts. So why don't we kind of go through a brief introduction, who you guys are, what, if we were to go over to your channel or your podcast, Michael, you know, what are we going to find? So why don't we start with Michael? Michael, thanks for being here.
Sure. And again, thanks so much for having me. So, hey, my name is Michael. I'm half of the Canadian Atheist podcast. I do it with my good friend, Dean. And we enjoy talking to believers and non-believers. We cover news and current events from a Canadian atheist perspective. But of late, the podcast taken a little bit of a shift where we're having more discussions, which have turned out to be really awesome. CJ's been a part of those. If you follow the link that Standing put in the description, you'll find the archive of all the shows. And we've been doing it for about 4 years now. And you'll find podcasts with people like Kent Hovind and Saitan Brugenkate, all the way up to Aaron Ra and Lawrence Krauss. So we've been lucky to have some great guests and stuff like that. But it's these discussions that are really becoming my favorite thing to do. So I'm looking forward to this. Thanks.
Awesome. I appreciate that, Michael. And CJ, thanks for being here as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for having me also. As Standing said, I'm CJ Cox. I have the channel TheCynicogue, which you can kind of see here as far as my banner, as well as TheCynicogue News. So I do two different channels. One is TheCynicogue, where I do apologetics and religion. I have a apologetics podcast on there called Unapologetics, as well as open rooms, debates, and things of that nature. And then I also do TheCynicogue News, which was up until recently all actually on my Cynicogue channel. I split them because I believe politics and religion are separate enough topics that they should have their own separate channels. So the Cynicogue News is where I do my Watchdog podcast, as well as any political debates or open rooms. And then other than that, I'm just, a debater so far. I seek to be a scholar, but I am not a scholar yet. And I appreciate if nobody calls me such, all pretty good. And I appreciate you bringing me on here too, because as a debater, obviously being on the different debate channels, specifically the Christian debate channels, is one of the biggest things that anybody else can do as far as collaboration with me. So I appreciate you a lot.
Amen. Well said to the both of you, Michael and CJ. So definitely to everybody in the audience, check the description box of this video to find links to Michael's podcast and CJ's channels. So why don't we get right into it then? Everyone's excited for this debate, so we're going to jump right into the opening statements. We are going to be starting with CJ. You are going to have roughly a 5 to 10 minute, and feel free if you got to take the full 10 minutes. We'll have a 10-minute opening statement. And whenever you're ready, we're good to go.
Absolutely. So I'll just get a quick drink here. All right, and I'm good to go. Thank you. And again, I just want to say shalom all. And blessings to you all in the name of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, to whom I give all the glory. I obviously want to again thank Michael and Standing for having this conversation with us today, as well as the audience for being here with us today. The thesis that we have presented before us today is, are the 10 Commandments ethical? And I have been tasked with taking the affirmative position in this particular, or on this particular thesis rather, which, if I may be so bold, I think is going to be a relatively simplistic affirmative to take. It is my view that by the end of this conversation, not only is the answer to this thesis yes, but by the end of this conversation, I think we'll probably agree that the answer to this thesis is yes, and that the best that can be expected on the opposing side is that the 10 Commandments could be more ethical, but not that the 10 Commandments are unethical or unethical. Now, even that is going to come, I believe, with its fair share of problems, considering things like what is the grounding of morality and things of that nature. However, just assuming that we are not going to necessarily get too deep into that particular portion of the conversation today, I just want to reiterate, I think that if we take the values which me and Michael likely agree on, which both the atheist and Christian members of the audience likely agree on, at best, the argument that you can present against the 10 Commandments is that they could be more ethical, but it is not reasonable to present an argument against the 10 Commandments that they are, in fact, unethical. And so now that I've gotten that and gotten it repeated, I'll just go ahead and get right into the points. So we'll take it one by one. The very first commandment is, thou shalt have no other gods before me. Now, if somebody is not a believer, this may come at bare minimum, it could seem to be pedantic and not useful. And at maximum, one could even go as far as to say that it's egotistical, right? Obviously, for the believer, that this is something that would immediately make sense. God is, of course, the creator of all things. He is the establisher of morality. He is the very definition of love, so on and so forth. And of course, we are not to have anything else before him, because he is the ultimate standard of righteousness, truth, justice, love, and etc. However, even with that Christian understanding, I do think there is a way that we could certainly get people who are not Christians to understand why thou shalt have no other gods before me is indeed an important passage, or an important law, I should say. For any of you who are married, likely you believe that there shall be no other spouses or even friends before you. Regardless of if you're male or female, regardless of if you're hetero or homosexual, chances are you probably believe, because for the most part, we are a monogamous culture, that is a position that should be uniquely yours, and that your spouse and or partner should not have anybody else in that position, not greater and not even equal, right? In other words, you're the husband, you're the wife, and you probably believe you have a justified jealousy over your spouse in that sense, right? In another example, if you were to create something, say you're a video game designer, you create a video game, and this video game gets bought out by who knows, right? Maybe it's Treyarch, or I don't know if Bungie still makes video games, but maybe it's them. But whoever it happens to be, right? You probably believe that it is your right to be the sole person, if you are the sole person who designed the game, to be the sole person credited for designing the game, and that nobody else should credit anybody else before you, because you're the designer of the game. We can go on ad infinitum with examples like this, whether with your best friend or your parents or something along those lines, maybe a boss, right? But the point of the matter is that we understand, when it comes to separate positions, just how important it is for one person and one sole person to get the credit, status, title, whatever it happens to be, that they deserve, that is rightfully theirs. Now, of course, if the Bible is true, then God is the sole creator of all things. That includes creativity, that includes logic, that includes morality, that includes your thumbs, that includes your dog, that includes literally every single thing. So to put anybody else in his position, to credit anybody else with his titles, obviously that would be something that is a no-go. Obviously something that God would have a righteous judgment or a righteous jealousy for. And I kind of worded that wrong, but his creation, I mean, is something that he would have a righteous jealousy for, the same way that you would have a righteous jealousy, over your creation or over your spouse or so on and so forth, right? Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image. Number 2. Once again, this is one that's probably seemingly pedantic from the atheist perspective and obviously makes sense from the Christian perspective. So to attempt to draw another bridge here, what I will say is this. assuming that there is a God, just for a moment, of course, because obviously if these 10 commandments are even legitimately 10 commandments, then they must be coming from the mouth, of God, right? If they're just the words of Moses, we can disregard them and nobody has to care. Is it justified for a group of people to take the credit that that you have earned, like in that first example, whether, let's take that video game, for example, right? Take the credit for that video game and place it in a photo of you, right? And give tithings and praisings for it and credit for it and all that kind of stuff to the photo of you. No, obviously that doesn't make any sense. The photo's literally just a picture. The fact that you would sit there and worship and credit and beloved a photo is absurd. Well, this is the same thing that we have going on here. Not only is God saying you don't make unto thee any graven image of the false gods, but you also don't make any graven image unto me, because that would be like worshiping the picture when you have the actual God. And it's insulting. I think you would probably agree in the example that I just gave. That's insulting. One should not be insulting the creator of all things, who is the ultimate standard of righteousness, judgment, and truth, right? Don't take the Lord's name in vain. Number 3. This one I think should be rather obvious to all people. But just in case it's not, let's go ahead and give the most extreme example, Nazi Germany. Nazi Germany famously had on their SS belts, God wills it, in German, which I don't know how to speak, but nonetheless, it translates into English as God wills it. Well, if there is a God, he's probably not particularly happy with people taking his name and using his name to slaughter his own chosen people, or innocent people at all, for that matter. I think it is safe for us to assume that if somebody were to do that to us, if somebody were to say, I massacre these people in the name of Michael the Canadian Atheist, or in the name of CJ Cox, that we would take extreme offense to this, that we would have a problem with this, that we would want something to be done about this. And this, of course, taking the Lord's name in vain, is not just simply the, gee damn it's and all that kind of stuff that we typically see in cursing. It is actually taking up the Lord's name for a vain purpose. And that is something I think that we can all agree is not only evil, but again, would be insulting to the Creator and would be a blight on his name. Remembering the Sabbath and keeping it holy is one of those ones that I think is a little bit less obvious even to the believer. We all understand that remembering the Sabbath is a way for us to remember to worship once a week. In fact, we all even do that on Sundays, even though we typically don't use the actual Sabbath. And we all recognize that remembering the Sabbath is a way to remember God's position as the creator of the universe. One of the things that is typically lost on us, because we actually have weekends as a given, is that remembering the Sabbath was also a way to make sure that nobody could overwork the slave, the worker, the child, the beast even, right? If you are an animal, all the way up to the paid worker, you deserve, according to the scriptures, at least 1 day of rest. You cannot be worked to the bone, something we here in the West didn't figure out until a little bit over 100 years ago. And the next ones past this actually end up being fairly obvious. Honor thy father and mother. I'm sure anybody who has had children will understand why that's an important thing. Obviously, you cannot teach somebody who is unwilling to be taught. Obviously, you're not going to be willing to be taught by somebody you do not honor. You have to honor your father and mother. That's just simply the way life works. They are to bring you into this world. Thou shalt not kill. It's actually more properly, thou shalt not murder. Once again, very obvious as to why this would be problematic, why God would have a problem with this. Obviously, we are image bearers of God. We are all unique, independent consciences that are equal in our standing before God. And he does not take that lightly at all. In fact, he very often says that if you are to take a innocent life, your own life is required of you. So he's quite vicious with it. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Once again, I think anybody married in the audience would understand just why that is such a terrible thing. And the fun fact about this is one that actually a lot of people tend to agree on, even when they're in positions you don't think they agree on, right? So, for example, I don't endorse polyamory by any stretch. But if you talk to polyamorous people, they do have adultery rules, if you will, right? And it's not like it's just a free-for-all. You get to go have sex with anybody you like. In other words, even the loosest of loose relationships still understand why adultery is a problem. Thou shalt not steal. Once again, that's fairly obvious. Don't take things that don't belong to you. Don't bear false witness. This is actually twofold. Number one, it's not a good thing to lie. I think we all understand that truth is better, that honesty is better, that in most situations, the honest route is going to be the better route. But also in the case of court, right? If you bear false witness against somebody in court, that is actually potentially something that could cause them to even go as far as losing their life. If not losing their life, then even, losing a significant portion of their life. And of course, that's another one that seems obvious as to why we should not have it there. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's house. It also goes on to list thy neighbor's wife and so on and so forth. But basically, thou shalt not covet. Once again, one that I find relatively obvious. Covetousness.
30 seconds.
Absolutely. Thank you. Covetousness is the thing that leads us to some of our most egregious crimes, including but not limited to almost every single one of the ones mentioned here on the Ten Commandments. You covet the woman, which is why you rape her. You covet somebody's things, which is why you steal. You covet in some way revenge, which is typically why you kill. Covetousness is an evil, vile, disgusting human trait, and I think most people would agree with that. And so to wrap up, I think points 5 through 10, or laws 5 through 10, we would probably agree on. And points 1 through 4, I think, even though we may not agree yet, I think there is a very, what's the word there? Sufficient reason for them. And I don't want to take too much time, so I'll just go ahead and end it there.
Awesome. Well, thank you for your opening statement, CJ. I appreciate it. And before I hand it over to Michael, I just want to remind the audience to tag me with their questions because we are going to have an audience Q&A after the discussion. So that being said, Michael, the floor is yours for your opening statement. Whenever you're ready, go ahead.
All right. Thanks again. CJ, I'm so excited. We found areas of disagreement. This is exciting. Okay, I'm not going to be nearly as long as CJ, but here we go. And I wrote it down, so I'll just be reading off of here. So I've heard it argued that the Ten Commandments are a solid ethical foundation. I contend they are not. While one might be able to argue that there are portions, perhaps in individual commandments, that hold ethical value, this is certainly not true of all of them. Since it is my understanding from CJ himself that he is a fundamentalist Christian, I cannot see a situation where he would parse them out. He has said in our previous discussions that he accepts the Bible as it is written. So I think it's fair to expect the same discussion regarding the Ten Commandments. So let's look at the 10. And yeah, I'm going to make you listen to them again. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. This is just taken from BibleInfo.com, by the way. So it's in simple language. You shall make no idols. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. Keep the Sabbath day holy. Honor your mother and father. Thou shalt not murder. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Thou shalt not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. And you shall not covet. Okay. So how do these relate to ethics? Well, what are ethics? The mighty Google defines ethics as moral principles that govern a person's behavior or the conducting of an activity. So it seems ethics are at least loosely linked to morality, and I don't think we'd get disagreement there. For definition of morality, I didn't stick with Google. I went to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy for that. Descriptively, to refer to certain codes of conduct put forward by a society or group, such as a religion, or accepted by an individual for her own behavior, or normatively, to refer to a code of conduct that, given specified conditions, would be put forward by all rational people. So given these, let's look at the 10. The first 4 commandments have absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with ethics or morality. They are divine decrees on how not to piss off a god. The 5th, honoring your father and your mother. Now, I found it interesting the way CJ addressed this, but what if your parents were neglectful or even abusive? Are they still worthy of honor? Of course not. They would have acted in a way that directly defies the very definition of morality or ethics. 6 and 8 are moral issues. You shouldn't murder or kill people, and you shouldn't steal. We could and might end up in a morality discussion here, and I don't want to do that too much because I think it's almost a different debate. I'll address my moral compass if asked, but I'd like to keep it brief and stick to the topic at hand, which is the 10 Commandments. I do view 7, adultery, as immoral, but for different reasons. The same level of harm is not done as if you murder someone, for example. I still think it's a crap thing to do, especially if you're supposed to be doing it to this partner whom you love. But if you're not happy, leave. Life is too short. 9, Lying. While some lies can be very damaging, I would argue that most of us tell little white lies all the time. These are done mostly not to be cruel to people. You know, grandma comes down the stairs. How do I look? Oh, grandma, you're ravishing, right? Even though she looks like a weathered newspaper. A more extreme example, and I'm sure everybody is familiar with this, with the whole Nazis at the door dilemma. And actually, CJ mentioned this. This is one example where lying is the absolute most moral thing you can possibly do, without question. Why? In this example, you are directly saving lives as opposed to condemning innocent people just because of their religion, ethnicity, or culture, in this case being Jewish. And finally, 10. There's nothing wrong with wanting better. CJ and I look at this a little bit differently, but there's nothing wrong with wanting better. And I think this is, in essence, what coveting is. Some might call it keeping up with the Joneses. It could easily be argued to be the heart of U.S. capitalism. Can it go too far? Sure. Look at people like Jeff Bezos. But there's nothing wrong with me working harder and saving so that I can get a nicer, bigger TV because I want to watch the game in 4K like my neighbors do. We can do better. Conspicuous by their absence in the 10 is anything about slavery, anything about the protection of children, the rights of women, cruelty towards other animals like pets, for example. Nothing about leaving the planet better than how we found it. So I look at that. In 20 seconds, you check out the first 4 in number 10, and we've improved on the ethics and morality of the 10 Commandments by 50%. And who's to say we couldn't do better if we had more time? Now, there might be some objections to my suggestions to improve the 10, but not without begging the question, inserting presuppositions, or adding to the discussion by bringing up other decrees from holy books, in this case, the Bible. The most common is that for the alleged decrees of Jesus, love your Lord your God with all your heart, mind, etc., and love your neighbor as yourself. These are commonly used as a foundation for saying, if you started with these, the alleged 2 greatest commandments uttered by Jesus, then you wouldn't own slaves, hurt people, or all these other things anyway, so you wouldn't even need to change the 10 Commandments. I contend that we shouldn't need that. Surely the holy and righteous 10 Commandments can stand on their own. They are, after all, according to the Bible, the only thing that God saw so important that he wrote them down himself. Thanks.
All right. Thanks to the both of you. Let me just remove the full screen here.
I think your robot is a little bit standing. Actually,
Yeah,
you're frozen.
And he did an internet test too before he started. That's terrible. I wonder if he's on Rogers like I am.
Yeah, I imagine so. I used to work. I guess I can't. I'm not actually allowed to say the company, but it was a call center. And if anybody's worked at a call center, you know, they're technically all like, you're not supposed to talk about that you worked with us, but whatever. Yeah, I know they act a lot. They act like they're Navy SEALs. But anyways, everybody I talked to in Canada had Rogers. Yeah,
I mean, there's 3 big ones: Rogers, TELUS, and Bell. And yeah, it's like, you know, it's whether, you know, do you like Ford or Chevy, right? It's people have likes and dislikes for different reasons. Let's just talk about internet service providers while standing. Oh, here we go.
I think we're good there. My let me see. Am I coming in okay?
Yeah.
All right.
Now I have to know if they're on Rogers or not.
Yeah. my kids upstairs bumped into the router and my wife yelled down at me. So good. Okay, so the day is saved. Looks like we're good. I'm not sure where I left off, but I was just pointing out that we're now moving into the open discussion portion of the debate. As always on this channel, we like to keep it cordial, clean, respectful, and as equally timed as possible, but we want to keep it free-flowing and organic as well. You gentlemen, you guys have debated before, so I doubt much moderation will be needed, but of course, I will moderate if necessary. So why don't we hand it over to CJ, since Michael just ended with his opening statement. CJ, you can kind of kick us off in the discussion portion. Maybe you had a couple of points you wanted to make or a question you wanted to ask, and we'll kind of go from there. So gentlemen, the floor is yours.
Thanks, man.
Absolutely. So I do want to, and I'm sure we'll probably have to address certain portions of them regardless, but I do just want to be clear, at least 5 through 9, you and I would agree are ethical, right? In other words, that honesty is better than dishonesty, that it's not good to kill, that it's not good to steal, that it's not good to commit adultery, and that it might be a good idea to honor your father and mother. Is that fair to say?
Well, and in my opening, I laid out how we don't agree on that, right? Like, so for example, if you had mommy dearest, right? Is she still deserving of honor or respect? You know, or you had parents that beat the crap out of you. You know, you have, so in the US there's CPS, in Canada there's CAS, Child Protective Services versus Children's Aid Society. If they come knocking on your door, it's because you're not doing the right thing as a parent, right? And they have just, you know, they have the power and the law behind them to come in and remove the children from parents' custody, right? And they don't take that lightly. But so, I mean, as a direct question, do you think if parents or a parent, because there are lots of single parents out there, right, are neglectful or abusive, are they still deserving of honor?
Well, I think there's two different ways I think that you could approach that. The first way, if I don't assume any of my religious beliefs at all, and just stick to ethics from a philosophical standpoint, I don't think that even under an absolutist moral system, that there are no exceptions to when something may or may not be more or less moral than something else. So in an example, right? Obviously, I would assume that we agree that it's bad to murder, but I would actually go farther and say that that taking life is wrong. That taking life, every time life is taken, including animal life, that is actually a moral wrong. However, it's also fairly obvious that we live in a world where taking life is inevitable in some way, shape, or form, right? Even if we manage to all go completely vegetarian, there's still wars. Even if we manage to get rid of all the wars, somebody's going to break into someone's house at some point in time and threaten someone's life so that they have to be knocked out with a hammer or something. You know what I mean? Like, it's just the world we live in. Now, I might say if somebody were to break into your house and you were forced to kill them as your only way to actually end up protecting yourself and your family, right? That would be, if I'm just speaking philosophically, an immoral act. But it would be a greater immoral act for you to have allowed this person to just come in, ransack your house, kill you and your kids and all that kind of stuff. You know what I mean? Like, so in other words, just because something happened that was evil doesn't necessarily mean that you weren't justified in the evil. If somebody else is committing some level of greater evil that forces you into that position. And I think that kind of fits the example when you're talking about not only just the honoring your father and mother, but also the question that is commonly brought up about lying. Just because lying is wrong doesn't mean that it might be an equal level of wrong to sell out your Jewish friend, right? In fact, I would argue if morals are absolute, then that means they have absolute value. And one, which is something that has an absolute value, and two, which is in the same category, they both have absolute values. And because of that, we can actually deduce two is more absolutely valuable than one, right? In the self-same way, I think you can look at morals like this and say, okay, it's absolutely wrong to lie. However, it's wronger. It's a greater level of wrong. Even though both are absolutely wrong, it is a greater evil, right, to sell out the Jew in your basement. Or in this particular case, it would be a greater evil to keep those children with the parents, right, than to honor the parents. But I don't think that disproves at all the law itself. I think that just proves that some laws might have more moral value to us than others. You know what I mean?
I know what you mean. And I'm a little perplexed with you being a fundamentalist Christian that you're arguing from a basically like, so you said philosophical ethics, right? So are you taking kind of like the normative standard?
Well, so in a sense, I mean, my personal philosophy is very deontological and absolutist. So I'm sure.
Are you a divine command theorist?
A pragmatic divine command theorist, meaning that I think that morality is understood by human beings by virtue of God's commands. However, God's commands are grounded in his own nature. So in other words, hypothetically, from our perspective, if God commanded us to go kill all the pandas, that would have been moral. However, God would not command us to kill all the pandas because it would be something that is outside of his nature. Does that make sense?
It makes sense. I think you're inputting your own kind of thought in whether or not God would say kill pandas, because he didn't have problems ordering all kinds of other crazy stuff. But what's interesting that if these are God's standards, and God's standards are absolute, yes, because
Absolutely.
there's no ambiguity within the Ten Commandments. You shall not do X, you shall do Y, right? So I want to go back, and I'd like to get an answer to my question: is if you have abusive parents or neglectful parents, are they still deserving of honor?
Well, and that's kind of what I'm saying, though, right? Is like, hey, I think that it's not that they're not absolute. And I would actually, to be fair, let's just get a one-word answer real quick.
Stealing's okay sometimes.
The child, yes. I believe
it's okay sometimes.
Because, well, no. So let me explain what I mean, right?
Sorry.
As a Christian, no, you're totally fine. It is something that is warranting a little bit more explanation than just a simple answer, so it's not your fault. But as a Christian, I believe in like Jesus says about when somebody strikes you on the cheek, give him the other. If somebody takes your cloak, offer him your other, stuff like that, right? In other words, I believe that if you're in a situation where you're being wronged, you have been called by God to love that person and forgive that person anyway, even though they don't deserve it, because you have been forgiven for things which you yourself don't deserve. So from a Christian perspective, if a child was being abused, I would tell the child individually within his own heart to try and honor his parents. Now, from a legal perspective, though, I'm absolutely getting CPS involved, right? I'm not going to let the child stay in an area where they're being abused because, as I said, one absolute can be greater than another absolute, right? And this is an explicitly biblical concept, by the way. Jesus talks about, or excuse me, I don't know if it's actually Jesus himself. I think it might be Paul. I can't remember the verse right now, but they talk about weightier measures of the law. Right. So like just as an example, God obviously does not want people being rebellious, at least if Romans 13 is his scripture, right? He wants people to be loyal to their government to an extent. He wants them to be good citizens. And yet at the same time, every single one of them
under Caesar, yeah, sure.
You know what I mean? All of them. Right. Meaning that wasn't an absolute thing, because the weightier measure of the law was sticking with Jesus Christ and keeping the faith. But that doesn't mean that it's still not absolutely true, that you should definitely try to honor those who are your superiors, right? I just think that when it comes to, there's this idea in absolute morality that since everything is wrong, nothing can be crossed at any point in time, right? Can
you say that again?
Since these things are absolutely wrong, none of these lines can be crossed at any point in time. I did say that incorrectly the first time.
Okay.
So like just as an example, the lie one, right? Since lying is always wrong, you can never lie, right?
Okay.
But the thing is we do live in a fallen world, and the Bible itself allows for that. In fact, just think of the death penalty, right? The death penalty is evil. That's at least if the scripture is to be believed, because taking life is evil. And yet, that's what the scripture itself commands for certain crimes. In other words, because of one evil, another evil all of a sudden does become potentially the more moral option. And I think when you use the example of numbers, you can see why that would be the case. If things have absolute value, then certain things will have absolute value that is greater than other things' absolute value. Like, right. For example, the 3 and the 2.
Right. But if we're talking about, so what I'm having a hard time wrapping my brain around is you've said absolutes and all these things, right? And yet it doesn't seem like you can answer my original question, right? If you have a parent that is abusive or neglectful, are they still worthy of honor?
Well, so I did answer that. I talk a lot, so that's why it was buried.
I mean, just yes or no. I mean, yes. And
as a Christian, I would tell that child, honor your parents. That is what Christ has called you to, even though they're in the wrong, even though they don't deserve it. So I changed the language a little bit from what you're saying. That is what you've been called to as a Christian. Now, that doesn't mean that they're right? It just simply means that the Bible calls you to that, turn the other cheek, give him the second cloak, walk a second mile kind of an ethic. Right. Whereas, the other ethics might not. Other ethical systems might not.
Okay. Ask me a question.
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing that I would ask is, so just using that same situation,
Sure.
would you, do you, first off, do you recognize the difference that would be made in having the child within their own self honor their parents, and on the flip side of that, still removing the child from the situation and not having absolute honor for them in that sense? Like, do you see why both of those things could be true at the same time, or could be moral at the same time, I should say?
No. And the reason I say that is because the parents would be, like I said in my opening, they're acting in direct contrast to that, right? And we because we chatted before, you don't have kids yet, right? But you will one day.
Correct.
And you are charged with the caretaking of this, of this life. And so you don't abuse it and you don't neglect it. There
Agreed.
are lots of parents that would be thrilled to have a child, so if you can't kind of do those things, which are like, it's not a big ask, right? Take care of your kids and don't abuse them. That's not a big ask.
Right.
Then you shouldn't have the kid in the first place. And you are not. And I don't think it's a big stretch for me to say, I think you'd have a hard time finding even a handful of Christian parents that would disagree with me on this point. Like, it's like, because to say, yes, they still deserve honor, even though they're not doing it. When we've talked to, these are supposed to be absolutes, right? So if we think about how morals and ethics are tied together, the parents are acting absolutely immoral in every way, shape, and form.
Agreed.
They are actively causing harm to a child. That is not under any circumstance, or sorry, let's put the commandment aside for a second. Under any other circumstance, you would say this is not deserving of honor in any way, shape, or form. So I don't necessarily think it's like special pleading, the fallacy to say, well, because it's a commandment from God, you kind of have to. And it's a simple answer for me. It really is.
So to a certain extent, though, I don't think that actually refutes what I'm kind of talking about, though, right? Because in the situation you're talking, and I would again say, I would stress, I don't think deserve is the right word. Because I don't think they deserve honor. That's not necessarily what is the case here, right? But what I'm saying is, I think two things can be simultaneously true at the same time, right? It can be true that child, that the honor that is given to that parent or group of parents, right, is not so absolute that we can't remove the child, right? In other words, the child's well-being needs to be accounted for. If the child is being abused, then something needs to be done about that, right? That is absolutely true. But I don't understand, I guess, from my perspective, why it couldn't also be true, while that first point is true, why it couldn't also be true that child, right, within his own heart could forgive and honor his parents as those who brought him into the world. And to give an example, right, and I don't know, I guess, how you feel about the forgiveness ethic that Christianity teaches. So I guess I'm just not 100% sure. I shouldn't assume that you agree with that, right? Because that is something that comes specifically from my religion. But when we look at the things Jesus talks about, right, he's saying somebody smacks you on the face. That's now obviously they don't deserve honor, right? But that's not his point. His point is you within your own heart can be the person who can go as far as to offer them the other. And of course, he talks in reductio ad absurdums, but the point there being, right, that what they do has nothing to do with you and the way that you treat the situation. So to sort of reiterate the question, right, we can still remove the child and still make sure that the parents are punished for what they're doing, which I would agree with, right? Mm-hmm. And I believe there's even scriptural precedent for that. But that doesn't, I don't see how that would be problematic with, or in contradiction rather, with telling the child, within your own self, don't be bitter. Honor those who have brought you into this world. Honor those who are your elders. Forgive, those sorts of things, right? In the self same way that Jesus says with the man who strikes you on the face.
So all I can say is this poor mythical child that's getting the crap beat out of them.
Mm-hmm.
I can't speak from outside myself. I know that myself, if I were in a situation like that I wouldn't have the capacity to honor that person because of how they would have acted. So it seems to me to kind of fly in the face of, so it's like fake it till you make it, right? So I'm going to be, even within myself, probably violating the 9th commandment about bearing false witness, about lying. And the Bible says that God is the reader of hearts. So he's going to know what my heart is saying anyway. So, and I can't fool God, can I? So I think we're at a little bit of an impasse. Maybe we should move on to something else. Can you tell me what how not making an idol is an ethical question?
Yeah, absolutely. So there is, and this isn't actually just strictly an Abrahamic concept. There's a concept throughout ethics in different cultures that there is some thing or force that we as human beings need to be more in tune with and in line with in order to have our life on the right ethical path. This is like the Logos in Greek philosophy, the Tao in the philosophies that you get in China. It's similar to the concept of Dharma in India. And of course, God himself is that in the Israelite culture, which I think is, in my personal opinion, I would argue that that's all those other cultures somewhat having a vague understanding, even though it's a false understanding of the fact that there's one God. But that's not my point. The point there being that it's something that philosophers in the past at least seemingly recognized, that there's some outside of us force that we need to be more in line with in order to be ethical peoples. Now, what this applies to, or excuse me, I'm not very good at talking today.
Okay.
The way this applies to idols is if you are bowing down to false gods, then by definition, you are outside of this path, right? You are not getting yourself in tune with Jehovah, right? Is just to put a name on it.
Right.
And therefore, you are going to be falling away from other sorts of moral things. And in fact, this is a weird one that a lot of atheists kind of, I don't know, like I understand why you guys don't see it, but it's very explicitly taught in scripture. If you look at Romans 1, right? Romans 1 seems to indicate that lack of worship, in other words, those first 4, comes first, and then people start acting debaucherously, which would be exactly what you would expect if all of these different philosophers had somewhat of a right idea that you need to be in line with whatever this outside of us force is in order to live morally. And that does seem to be the case if you look at societies throughout, right? Societies do get less religious and then they get more debaucherous. It's not typically, they want to get debaucherous and then get less religious. It's not, it doesn't tend to go that way.
Okay. And that relates to ethics how?
Because that's the foundation of ethics, right? Like that force, that Jehovah in this case,
right,
is the very foundation of ethics. So if you're not, if you're not even setting up a proper foundation, right, then everything else is going to be haywire. You might be able to build something, but it's not going to be something that's structured. You know what I mean?
So I don't worship anything,
right?
Maybe my wife sometimes, but that's a different story. Said very tongue in cheek, obviously. I don't worship anything, right? And am I unethical for doing this or not?
Well, so I don't know your own life, but I can say 3 things very briefly. Number one, I do believe that
God does not exist.
Well, and so that's what I was going to say. So I think number one, I would obviously believe that in and of itself is unethical. I think
how is that unethical?
Because I think that is, God is the very foundation for what ethics are, right? And being, like I said, being outside of that paths, just for the lack of a better term. I don't really know what else to word it, right?
Right.
I don't think that you even can end up building a proper moral structure. And let me give a perfect example, because I know a lot of people will often say, all right, okay, but I'm not an immoral person and I'm an atheist. Perfectly expected on the Christian worldview, right? Because I believe morals are objective, I believe we're all moral creatures, not just me and my fellow Christians.
And as I've said to you before, I'm a moral realist.
Right.
I believe
And
there
so
are
I know
moral
we agree
facts.
on that. And so I guess my point in saying is, since I believe that I am actually building my moral realism on the foundation from which these facts are actually built, and I believe that you are building your moral realism on arbitrary or non-existent one, right? Which, of course, if there's only one, then everything outside of that one would be arbitrary or non-existent.
But you're saying arbitrary after I already told you that I believe in moral facts.
Right, exactly.
So
But
not arbitrary.
Well, what my point is, though, is that I think when you end up going through all of these different paths, right, the foundation isn't actually structured. It's not there, right? In other words, I understand that. Say again?
Just like your God.
Well, I mean, that could be a claim,
because you have to beg the question, CJ, right? Like, and this is where I'm happy that we have disagreement finally, because you have to beg the question, right? So if you start with God, sure, cool, right? But if you don't start there, if you don't start with your conclusion, which I think is dishonest, then you don't come to the same conclusions that you do. And so the first four are just decrees, right? And we agreed earlier that there isn't ambiguity in the Ten Commandments, right? That these are supposed to be the ethical foundation. And the first four are just about don't make me mad. They don't impact they don't even impact how we interact with the world, because I don't pay any attention to the first four in any way, shape, or form in any part of my life. And they don't negatively impact how I interact with others and how my morality and ethics affect those around me. They are, and I mean, it's supposed to be this list that stands all on its own, but you could easily take those four out and live an incredibly moral life, judged by other people around you for how you actually act and interact with people, and have a real tangible impact on those around you.
Right. So let me give an example that bases itself off of your foundation real quick, and I think you'll see what I mean, right?
Okay.
So correct me if I'm wrong.
Have I shared my moral foundation with you?
I believe so. And
okay.
If I'm wrong here, definitely
okay.
correct me. But your foundation for what you believe is moral facts, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, is that which creates the most flourishing for conscious creatures without causing or while causing the minimum amount of pain and suffering for conscious creatures. Is that correct?
Right. So I use those pieces as a bit of an explanation. My moral foundation is well-being. So often I get asked by Christians, "Oh, what do you mean by well-being?" And so then I'll add the explanations of, well, what I mean by well-being is trying to promote flourishing while reducing suffering, not imposing your will against other creatures who cannot or do not consent, things like that.
Okay, so now do you believe that, because you're a more realist, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you believe that if somebody does not actually believe that well-being is a good thing or a necessary thing or a relevant thing, do you believe that their morality, even if they agree with moral realism, will at some point be flawed?
Say that one more time.
So if one were to have a moral foundation that did not include anything about well-being, they just threw it out as a pedantic or potentially even negative detail.
Okay.
Would they, in your view, at some point have a flawed moral system?
In my view, yes.
Right. So that's you just answered the question as to why those first four are important. If you don't start with the right foundation, you can build a house on the wrong foundation, but at some point, somewhere, it's going to give, right? And what my point is, and the point of those other philosophers when they talk about the Tao and the Logos and the Dharma and all that, right, is God is that what you're putting as well-being, I'm putting as God. And just as you're saying, if you don't acknowledge well-being, your moral system will fail somewhere, I'm also saying if you don't acknowledge God, your moral system will fail somewhere. You know what I mean?
Right. But under your worldview, I can say the same thing and point out that the Christian worldview does fail, because if you follow the letter of the 10 Commandments, then you will honor your father and mother, even though they are undeserving of it. And that puts my morality, in my opinion, ahead of yours.
See, I don't think it does, because I think that as a matter of fact, I would go as far as to say that one of the most beautiful and unique things about Christianity is the fact that you do honor, love, forgive, and etc. people who are undeserving of it, precisely because you are undeserving of it, right? So in other words, when if I were to tell somebody, and by the way, just to be clear, I'm not going to like yell at an abused child and say that you're damned to hell or something like that. Don't. I hope nobody gets the wrong idea that I'm going to start now. You guys are sinful and all that. But from the Christian ethic, right, we would obviously teach that child, probably when they're older, because they probably won't understand very much about it as a young one, right? But that it's better to forgive and to honor anyway, because that's the way Christ is with us. He loves you anyway, regardless of all the stuff that you've done, which is the same reason why you should be doing it to other people. And the interesting thing about that, you might not think the
Holy Spirit.
Say again?
Unless you blaspheme the Holy Spirit.
Well, and that's a conversation for another time, right? The point being, though, that I mean, I think that's not only is that a good thing, I think that's one of the most beautiful aspects of Christianity. The fact that you would have that child, yeah, you know what? You are 100% correct. Your children do not, or your parents do not deserve honor. Do it anyway, because that makes you the more ethical person. You know what I mean? If this person does not deserve to be forgiven, forgive them anyway. This person doesn't deserve to be loved, love them anyway. This is the reason I have such a problem with some of these hardcore, like NIFB kind of folks, right? Is because that's not the gospel. The gospel is love them, care for them, all that kind of stuff anyway. Like I said, he strikes you on the face, offer him the other cheek. He makes you run a mile, do another one. He takes your cloak, go get the one from your house and give that one to him too. Now, don't get me wrong. That's an impossible ethic to actually meet, right? But it's an amazing standard, I think, at least. Go ahead.
Okay. Okay, let's move on to another. Let's move on to something else then. Sorry, maybe you should start. Maybe ask me something. I think I took over a little bit there.
Yeah. So I'm interested actually now in the first commandment. Now I kind of already just pointed out, I think, why I think you have to be founded on the right area, and why I think, even though we disagree on the foundation, we would agree that you need the proper foundation in order to set up the most proper ethical system. But disregarding that for a second, because I think that we just covered that a lot. Do you believe that you have a right to a certain level of jealousy over your creations or your spouse or your children or things of that nature? So, like, in other words, if somebody is being flirtatious with your wife, I don't mean to take it to this level, but just the point just being right. Would you agree?
I'm super secure in my marriage. You can say whatever you want. Yeah.
Well, and I figure as much, so I appreciate that. But you would agree, right, that there is a certain the jealousy you would feel at that point is a righteous jealousy, because she's your wife. She's not his wife. He needs to kick rocks, right? So in the self-same,
she's my wife though, because she said yes, not because I took her, right?
And right. So, I agree.
And so I don't feel that jealousy. The satisfaction I get, and there will be people who just don't believe this, is when somebody does flirt with her and she turns him down and comes back to me.
Right.
She comes back to this ugly mug. Right. That's, so I don't get jealous over that. It's, my wife said something interesting to me on one of our anniversaries. She wrote it in a card. She said, I choose you every day. So it's her choice to be with me. I don't need to be jealous. And if she doesn't choose me anymore, okay, that'll suck because I love her. But you know, then I might be jealous of who she's with because how amazing she is. But not, not within in the realm of reality where our marriage still exists and is rock solid.
Well, so there's a couple things there, actually. I think the first thing I want to point out is not only do I agree in the sense that, oh, shoot, I just kind of lost my train of thought. There it is. So I do agree with you that it has to be by choice, right? But also, not only do I agree, but so does the scripture, right? It actually goes on and on and on and on and on and on and on. In fact, I don't know if you've ever read the Old Testament, specifically the Torah, but sacrifices have to be willing. The covenant has to be willing. The circumcision for your household has to be willing. Now, of course, there's federal headship and stuff like that. So it has to be willing for the patriarch per se, not necessarily each individual child. And so you could argue about that. But the point is, there's a level of constant do it willingly, no man compel you, all that kind of stuff, right? So I do agree with that. But you also, I think you didn't necessarily answer the point in that you said you wouldn't be jealous. And don't get me wrong, that's perfectly fine. I'm not saying you have to be. But you would agree that if you were, right, even if I'm not saying that you did something about it. I'm not saying that you yell at the wife or anything like that. I'm not saying that she does anything about it. I'm just simply saying if you had that little, hey, dude, back off, she's mine, right? Which is the same thing she should have for you, by the way. I'm not saying that you like as her man possess her or anything like that.
It's fine.
That's justified, right? Because she is your wife and you are her husband. They're not other people's. Those other people kick rocks. And not that doesn't mean that you don't have to be comfortable or anything like that. For example, I don't think God is going about worrying about his most faithful saints. Oh, are they going to leave me? You know what I mean? But at the same time, I do think it is true to say that if you truly have care for that person, there is a level of justified jealousy there, right?
I disagree, and I'm not trying to, not give you ground because I don't want to give you ground. But I think jealousy is kind of a useless emotion. Now we do say, like, we call each other this. Like I'll say to her, "You're my person," and she'll say to me, "You're my person," right? Meaning that we are each other's, number one, like you said. I don't think that can be disputed. I wouldn't dispute that. But I think jealousy is kind of a useless emotion. I see people all the time driving around in cars that I really want. I'm a Porsche fanatic, and I just don't have the money to buy one. So I get it's like I want that. But jealousy, for the most part, I see as a useless emotion. So I can't tell you that I've felt what it is you're suggesting is reasonable, and I wouldn't think less of anyone else that said that they do feel that way, but we're all different. So let me. Maybe some people feel it and some don't. I don't, and I think I'm glad that I don't feel that way.
Well, and so let me edit it a little bit and see if potentially a different example might evoke a different response. So, and by the way, I would distinguish between a justified jealousy over that which is actually yours and an unjustified jealousy that I would define as a covetousness, which I think is the case when, I just want that dude's car. You know what I mean? But nonetheless, if you were to, like in that video game example I gave, you create some kind of a video game or whatever it is. I don't know that's just the first example that came to my mind because I've been recently looking for a job as a video game tester. But nonetheless, anything, right? Just some creation of yours. And I come in and I take all the credit for that, right? Do you believe that in that sense, you have a justified jealousy over your creation? Like, that's yours. You made it. I didn't make it.
Right. I think in that example, I don't think I'd be jealous. I think I'd be pissed off if you came in and took credit for something you didn't do. And then I hope that I would be big enough to just point out that it wasn't your accolade to take. So is it probable that I would feel a degree of jealousy for a moment? Yeah, I think so. But I think I'm self-aware enough to know I get over that pretty quickly and be able to go take back the credit that was rightly mine.
Exactly, though, right? You take back the credit that's right, because there is multiple definitions of jealousy, right? And I understand the connotation of the word, in some instance might be negative, but what you just described is the definition of jealousy that is, I can't exactly quote it off the top of my head, but it's like fiercely protective over your own stuff, right? So it's not envy, it's not covetousness, it's not anything like that, but it's like being, fiercely protective over your things, and that's what you just described. Right.
Sure.
It's so we would agree that that's justified, right? That you have that right, even if, and I'm not saying you have to be envious or hateful or anything like that about it, right? But just that your claim, hey, no, this is mine, right, is justified.
Sure.
So take that back now to the first commandment, thou shalt have no other gods before me. Well, the title of God is his. There is no other, right? As far as the creation of life, that's what he did. As far as the grounding of morality, that's what he did. As far as the divine reasoning that dictates the universe that the philosophers would talk about, it's his reasoning, right? Mm-hmm. Wouldn't you agree then that in the self same way that you have a right to be protective over what is yours, that God would have a right to say, no, I am protective over what is mine. It's my creation. It's my people. Don't be giving this credit to other people or having other gods.
So you and I have had, and all of our discussions have been much like this one is, which is very cordial. And I appreciate that about you and our ability to have these talks. And we've had in the past, we've had discussions where I have stepped inside and, kind of accepted your worldview as true so that we could forward a discussion. So we didn't get stuck on that first bit. Right. I can't do it here because what you're doing, so if your worldview was true, absolutely. I still think it would, even if everything about your worldview is true, I would still think that would make this God pretty petty, right? As the creator of everything. And he's still worried about, that little thing. I would expect, or no, I wouldn't say I'd expect. I would hope that if it was me, that I wouldn't get all bunged up over something like that by something as insignificant as one of my creations. But it, at its root, still begs the question: yes, if your worldview was correct, but it's not.
Well, see, and I think to an extent that we have to kind of shelve that for another debate, unfortunately, because
absolutely, yeah, that's totally fair. Okay, so let me ask you something. So one thing I brought up, right, about and we've been dragged off sounds harsh, and I don't want to make it seem like I mean it that way, but there have been many times where you've referenced other things, right? Where you've gone to other sections of the Bible, where it be Romans or this, that, and the other thing, to kind of pull back in, right? Mm-hmm. But like I said, it seems to me, and I don't think it's unfair to say that these 10 commandments should be able to stand, right? Because on the tablets, right, that Moses carried down, accepting that it happened, I don't think at the bottom there was an asterisk that said some conditions may apply, right? Don't forget to read the accompanying documents for further explanations, right? That these things should be able to stand alone, because the rest of the Bible that you're using, like when you reference Romans 1, the people that were at the foot of Sinai, it was Sinai, right? It was Sinai, yeah. Right? Yeah, didn't have the benefit of Romans 1 to reference, right? All they had were those 10 commandments, and this is the foundation. This is the foundation, right? So it seems fair to me to say we shouldn't have to go all over the place to try to find justifications for these things. And yet, and like I said, so the point I wanted to make is that nothing about, so because if you reference love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul, blah blah blah, and love your neighbors yourself, then like I said, well, if you followed those two commandments, because I think Jesus said these are the greatest, or no, there are no commandments greater than these, I think is the wording, mm-hmm. Then you wouldn't have a slave, then you wouldn't beat your kid, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. But there's nothing in the like this was the list, right? But nothing about slavery, nothing about preserving the world we live in, nothing about the other things that I wrote down, like treating women equally. In fact, the Bible, and I know that it's not necessarily Jesus. I think it's a lot of times it's Paul that says this stuff. Like seems like he was a wicked misogynist. But treating women equally, because that doesn't happen anywhere in the Bible. And you'll be able to pluck at little things and say, oh, well, there were female prophets and they were female that, and they were also just given away as chattel. Like I don't remember, you may be able to point one out, any story in the Bible where it said a man and woman came together. It's so-and-so took a wife, so-and-so was given a wife, because Abraham was was such a good servant. God gave him all these wives. Here, man, set up your little pimpin' village, have a party because you're my guy, right? So how is it that, like, again, the first four, which it seems easy to just say, let's set these aside and let's actually address things that have a real impact, right? Because in this world, even if your worldview is true, God's not doing anything to help us out. Well, we have to help ourselves. So we have to address ethics on our own, because we're on our own.
So there's, I think, a couple things that I would personally want to point out there. I think the first is just to recognize.
Yeah, I went on a lot, so yeah.
No, you're totally fine. The Ten Commandments don't actually exist in a pure vacuum, right? At least if the traditional understanding is true, which is that Moses wrote the Torah, or at least the foundation of the Torah. So they would actually have multiple laws as well, including love your neighbor as yourself. That comes from Leviticus, and so on and so forth. Now, so that's the first thing. The second thing, I think, you talk about the Ten Commandments being able to stand on their own. The thing is I do believe that they can, as far as a foundation, right? Like, I think that when we actually have the situations where, like, we can argue that there's problem with it, I think these problems end up being either kind of like the lying one, where it's like, well, just because a law is true, just because something is absolutely the case, it doesn't mean that something else might not have greater absolute value, right? Or it's something along the lines of what we've already discussed with 1 through 4, which is where I think, if you don't start with that foundation, you don't get to go anywhere, right? Or if you do go somewhere, you build a house on a very collapsible foundation at some point. There's going to be something wrong along the way, right? Now, when you mention things like, you have all these different issues that potentially could have been added in, like care for the environment, the equality of women, slavery, so on and so forth. I think
you think those things are good, right? Like you think we shouldn't own people, right?
Yeah, but I think there also has to be a lot of things that have to be said about it too, right? Like, so for example, with the equality for women one, right? Do I believe that women are human beings that are equal to me and you in every way, shape, and form? Absolutely. In the sense that every way, shape, and form, in the sense that they're person, right? They're who they are as a human is just as valuable as I am, right?
Okay.
Do I agree that they're equal in the sense that women should be doing the self same things that men do and vice versa? Absolutely not. Because we're just not designed that way, right? So just as an example, I don't believe women should be soldiers, or at the bare minimum, I don't believe we should pull any punches if women do become soldiers, right? Like, you have to meet the exact same standard a man would, which means for every 200, 300, 400, 500, however many men we're going to get in this army, there's going to be one of you, right? I'm sorry, that's the way it has to be.
And you and I have had this. Sorry to cut you off, but I want to say you and I have had this discussion before. Like, and I think it was I referenced a firefighter, right? If you have a group of people that are applying to be a firefighter, then the criteria for being a firefighter, one of them is being able to drag me, all 235 pounds of me out of a building. If you do that, I don't care if you're a woman or not. If you can't do that, I'm sorry, you don't get the job. So, right. So you and I are in agreement that there are some things, but there are women who could pick you and me up like rag dolls, I'm sure. right? And they just don't want to be firefighters. But we agree, as far as soldiers go, I think the idea of armies and wars are, you could maybe argue they're necessary, but I hate them. But I'm reminded of a line from the movie G.I. Jane with Demi Moore. And she was going to go through for the SEAL training, right? And one of the people who was advocating for her to go through it says, how strong do you have to be to pull a trigger, right? So you could maybe make some arguments on that, right? Like with all this, so if you're talking about hand-to-hand combat, maybe, and yet I'm sure there are women that could both whoop us. But on average, are men more physically stronger than women? Yes, but there are going to be exceptions. But there's not as much of this hand-to-hand physical stuff, right? Like we give our soldiers guns so that they don't have to use the bayonet on the end of the musket or whatever it is anymore, right? So you could make arguments against that fairly easily. I appreciate you saying that you believe that women are equal to men, but I don't think you would agree that women should have should be ministers or pastors.
Yeah, exactly. And I can even kind of explain some of that too. Sorry, I had a phone call. I just wanted to get that done away with. So the female pastor one, I think, is a really good example. So I have often asked the question to a lot of my female friends, Christian, atheists, nominal, doesn't really matter, just sort of all of them, right? To sort of compare and contrast whenever they ask me this same question, right? I ask them, all right, so you are presented with a loving and devout homosexual couple, and they are just as Christian as anybody else. They are monogamous to each other. They love each other very much. They've been together for 25 years, and they've been firm believers since they were as young as they can even remember, right? Mm-hmm. Are you endorsing the marriage, yes or no? I kid you not, 0 of them have said no. 0, right? And there's a reason for that. Women are designed in such a way, I believe designed, right? Because I believe in a creator. Designed in such a way as to be the more empathetic and caring and kind of the sexes, right? Whereas men are going out and being able to, shove people around and, work 50 hours a week without much contact with other people and stuff like that. Stuff we're designed to do, right? To be kind of grunts. Women aren't. Women are not designed that way. Women are designed as, they're kinder, they're gentler, they understand better. My wife understands me better than I understand me as far as my emotions are concerned. You know what I mean? And that's good, but it causes problems in the ministry. It causes problems when it comes to divorce. It causes problems when it comes to fornication. It causes problems when it comes to homosexuality, right? Because you need that rigid disciplinarian in the ministry. You don't want somebody who's going to be legalistic. Don't get me wrong. My own pastor, when I was doing a lot of the things I shouldn't have been doing, was very kind and gentle with me, but he was also very clear. What you're doing is in a direct affront to God, and it needs to change if you want to grow in this faith, right? That's not something I get even from my very devout female friends.
So it's interesting. Oh, sorry. Finish, please.
Okay, I was just going to wrap it up with just saying that I think that I don't think when we talk about things like biblical patriarchy, I don't think it's supposed to be men are better. I think that's a misinterpretation by sexist, misogynistic people. But I do think it is that men and women do have certain qualities that they are purposefully designed for. And I think we function better typically when we are fulfilling those designs. But go ahead.
So it's interesting. I don't think I would disagree with design. It's just design for evolution. But we're going to disagree on that little tidbit. Now, one of the things that's interesting is, and this is another topic you and I have agreed on in the past, I appreciate your fundamentalism, right? So if let's say, for example, I'm going to put myself in that situation. So I'm a Christian and I go to this church and there's a gay, a lesbian couple that moves into the neighborhood. And they were accepting before because, they went to a pretty, a decent Unitarian Universalist church where they were from before, but there isn't a community like that where they are now. So they figure, okay, we'll check out the United Church or something like that. And they come inside and there's a female pastor, right? And she's accepting of that. If I was a Christian, I would be like you, CJ. I would be a fundamentalist, and I'd refer to Leviticus 18, Leviticus 20, and call her out on it, right? What I would say is, while there might be, so you might find someone like Joy Behar, who I think I got that name right, who might be accepting of something like that. Okay, but and we've talked about this guy before, but Steven Anderson, that walking piece of human garbage, I bet his wife wouldn't be too accepting of it. And it goes back to what I said before, is that, different people are going to react in different ways, right? So, these harder core, and, you've kind of, you've spoken out against the things that you disagree with the NIFB as well. And you and I are in agreement with that. They're garbage. Mm-hmm. So again, you will find you may find people who will be more accepting. And even as an atheist, I would call them out for being a hypocrite. It's like, have the courage of your convictions. So I would stand beside you and call them out for that. But again, I don't even know if Steven Anderson's married. I don't care. But let's pretend that he is.
Right.
His wife would want them, burning in the lake of fire right alongside him with no difference.
Well, and don't get me wrong. I'm no doubt that there'll be exceptions to some of this stuff for sure, because there's always going to be exceptions to things in this regard, right? The problem, though, is that we don't typically operate in the realm of exception, unfortunately. As just a real world example, every single, and I do actually mean this literally. You can go through and look at them, every single one of them, every single Christian denomination that has buckled on the moral issues of our day, things like, and don't get me wrong, I understand me and you disagree with this, but you would, as you just said, agree with me that the Bible certainly agrees with me on this, right? Homosexuality, divorce, all that kind of stuff. The buckling on that, every single case without exception began with female pastorship. There might be an exception coming in the future, which is the Roman Catholic Church, because Pope Francis seems like he might be a little bit more of a progressive on those issues, and he doesn't appear to be progressive on the female deacons issue. So we might get our first exception in the Catholic Church, but that's a might, right? And I think it makes sort of the point, right? Like, is there Deborahs, to use a biblical example, or Phoebes, to use another biblical example? Absolutely, I've met them, right? But even they still, number one, do have very particular feminine qualities, just like all the men I know have very particular masculine qualities. And also, they aren't the majority, right? They aren't the majority of even believing women. Even extremely devout fundamentalist believing women are still primarily going to be softer, more caring, more kind, those kinds of things, because it's what they're designed basically to do, right? Like, they're mothers.
Yeah. The problem is, I think you might be reaching to say, to make such a broad generalizing statement. I think it might be more fair for you and more realistic for you to say that of the people you've encountered, because there's thousands of denominations of Christianity, and, more than 1 billion all over the planet. So I don't know. I don't know how much of that sample size you've had access to be able to make such a statement as, the overwhelming majority would be. So that might be a little bit of a stretch on your part. Okay. So what about so in regards to women, it sounds like you're saying, yes, treat them equally and all that other stuff, but with a little asterisk beside it. Like, is it okay for a father to bequeath his daughter to a man? 2021.
2021, I think that we've gotten to a point now to where that would not be necessarily, I don't know, it's a weird thing, because let me kind of explain what I mean by it, right? I think morals are absolute. So to say it would be immoral right now, it wouldn't be accurate. It wouldn't be consistent. Because I do think, I mean, I don't know the gender, I guess, of your kids, but I think there was a point in time. Say again?
I have one child, a daughter,
okay,
who is cisgender. She identifies as a girl. But I have one daughter. She's 23. So that's
now
dating myself.
We do live in an age now to where even if she makes terrible decisions, they're not the way it could have been 600, 700 years ago, right? Which is a big part of the reason why we don't arrange marriages anymore. You got to kind of remember back in the day, I mean, first off, we don't know how long you're going to live. Second off, we can't just trust any old person, right? Like, just as an example, now obviously I've improved a lot since then, but hypothetically, if I wanted to court the woman I'm married to now, right? But I lived 1,000 years ago, and her father looked at me and I'm just a rapscallion and a thug, right? Well, she'll die, literally die, if she hooks up with me, right? Like, that's the way it's going to be, because I can't even take care of myself right now. Thank the Lord, I grew out of that. But at that point in time, I might not have enough time to grow out of that, right? Because, I mean, who knows when the next tribe over is going to invade? Who knows when the next disease is coming? Who knows when we're going to have a drought? Who knows, right? So, like, arranged marriages, they make a lot of sense in that regard, right? Where, like, this is literally life or death kind of a thing. And especially when you get royalty involved. Because now, not only is it life or death for you, it's life or death for the entire country. You can't just marry the guy you love if he's a dunce, because he's going to be the crown prince potentially, right?
Yeah. Don't get me started on royalty. I have a real problem with the monarchy. But that's something maybe Standing and I could have a discussion on, given the figureheads in Canada. But it's it almost sounds like, you're arguing from like a relativistic perspective, right? So maybe not so much now, but then, which seems interesting for a set of moral and ethical standards that are supposed to stand the test of time.
Yeah, and I think that's why I would say,
but it's different now.
That's why I would say, like, I wouldn't say that it would be immoral to arrange marriages today, because I don't think no.
What if she said, Dad, that guy's a creep, man. Like, come on. He looks like my Uncle Wilbur. Why do you want me to marry him? I'm not attracted to him. Like what if she's just like, so you put the two of them together and she's in the background going, no, Dad. Right?
Well, I get that, right? I do understand, and I understand where you're coming from. And I even think that it is one of those things that is a result of being in a sinful world, where you do kind of have to take the lesser of two bad options, right? But that's why, like, I don't know. I'd have to think on whether or not I would apply the term immoral to it, because I absolutely believe that, and I not only do I believe, I think it's almost obvious, right, that up until 100 years ago, just doesn't make any sense to not have arranged marriages. Maybe 150 years ago, right? Because, like, just the point of you dying is, and let me just sort of point out too that, the fact that I'm having to go through such trouble explaining this is almost a perfect reason as to why this couldn't be included in the 10 Commandments, right? Because that's, of course, our topic. Because it's not as simple as the killing question. Killing is wrong. Sure, there might be a situation that justifies it, but we all intuitively know what those are.
CJ, right? You just said killing's wrong, but there might be a situation that justifies it.
Right. There's going to be situations that justify wrong things, though. There's going to be situations that justify wrong things, though, right?
There's going to be a situation where it's okay. Like, but I was specific in that I said 2021, right? Like, I didn't say 150 years ago, right?
Right, but we are talking about the 10 Commandments, right?
If the 10 Commandments are valid now, right? And they're the basis. Then why is it such a big question, or whether or not it's moral or ethical to marry off your daughter, right? It, like, all of these things are supposed to stand the test of time, even though I would argue for the most of them, even if just, like I said, just took the first four, and coveting out of there and replace them with other things. And even if we took my 10 commandments back 2,000 years ago, we'd be in a better place.
See, I don't think
I'm going to jump in there real quick, CJ.
Oh yeah, sure, absolutely.
Yeah, of course. And I want to give you a chance to respond as well. I got to say the hour dialogue portion has flown by. Gentlemen, it's been a fantastic debate, lots of engaging discussion and great points. And I also want to thank the both of you for making this an incredibly easy debate to moderate. You guys were both very cordial, respectful, and kept the dialogue professional. So lots of fun. We've had a great chat, tons of great questions. Maybe what we should do is, CJ, because you started with your opening statement, why don't you take a couple minutes to kind of wrap up your thoughts, wrap up your points, and then we'll hand it over to Michael to do the same. And then we'll go into some audience Q&A, because I know I kind of stopped you guys abruptly there. So this will give you the chance to make your final points in pertaining to the discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll be quick as far as the response part. I would just simply say that I think that the conversation we just had and how it's like seemingly even derailed from 10 Commandments almost proves, I think, the point that these wouldn't stand the test of time, right? Because if arranged marriage was the more moral option at one point in time, and now it isn't, then that implies that that particular law, and we can argue about, the ethics of whether or not it's an absolute immorality or a morality, right, as far as that's concerned. But what it indicates is that that particular law isn't something that stood the test of time. It wasn't always equally wrong at all times. And on the flip side of that, you don't see the same thing with any of the laws that we do have there, right? Killing is just as wrong now as it was in 1450 BC. Lying is just as wrong now as it was in 1450 BC. It's, so on and so forth. And so I think that almost proves the point, in my personal opinion, as to why, things like don't have arranged marriage or things of that nature wouldn't have worked. And we didn't get into the slavery one, but, I would argue that we in the modern age have simply, we call our slavery different things. I'll put it that way. But I don't think we've actually gotten rid of it. We've made it better and we call it something else. And I think that that's an important detail to point out, but that's for a different kind of debate. Right. And the point I think that we end up reaching is, it does seem to me like there are two major objections that, in my opinion, don't work. I'm not saying there's only two objections. I'm just saying there's two major ones that I feel like don't work, right? The first one is, well, certain exceptions exist to certain laws. And it's like, okay, well, that it's not even really an exception in my view, as much as it is like that number comparison, right? Absolute value means one thing has greater value than another at some point in time. At least it will at some point in time, right? And the second point is we can replace these laws with new laws, right? Because I think, and don't get me wrong, we disagree on what the foundation is, but we did agree that if you don't start on the right foundation, you're going to go haywire. And I think that if the Bible is true, then of course those first four commandments then become very important. And also I would like to point out too, that fourth commandment is also rest, right? It is also rest for the animals, for the workers, all that kind of stuff, something that was not necessarily common in the past. And if those particular arguments fail, then in my opinion, what we have is this could have potentially been better, but we don't have this is actually unethical, right? And I think that's kind of what I was saying earlier in the debate, in my opening statement, right? It's like you could, and I would disagree, but you could argue from a just purely philosophical standpoint, hey, maybe X, Y, and Z could make this better, right? But to say that it's actually unethical and that it hasn't stood the test of time, I think that's very clearly not the case. And with that, I would concede, since I think this is basically closings, right? This is my closing statements.
Yeah. Yes. And CJ, thanks for those closing words and that closing statement. Let's throw it over to you, Michael, and take a couple minutes, wrap up your thoughts in kind of the form of a concluding statement, and we'll get into some questions. So the floor is yours, Michael.
Yeah, thanks. I don't know that I have a lot to say. I think if I haven't said it by now or made a point, I probably won't in another minute and a half. And I think it would be probably just largely rhetorical for me to just restate the things that I've already said. I didn't expect to deconvert CJ this talk. And I don't think he expected to convert me either. But it sounds like at minimum there's a foundation for a round 2. So Standing, if you're up for that, then I'd be totally up for that.
Absolutely.
And let's get on to questions. Thanks so much for this.
Awesome. Yeah, I think a round 2 would be a lot of fun. An hour and a half has flown by. It's been a great debate, and it felt good to sit back, relax, and enjoy the dialogue, gentlemen, because like I said, you kept it professional and easy to moderate. So we've still got a great chat here with a ton of questions. That being said, I don't think we're going to be able to get through every question. So we'll do about, let's say, roughly 20 minutes of questions. Michael, you're a good sport. This is a Christian channel, and by the looks of it, almost every single question is for you. So what we're going to do to keep it fair is when I ask the question, you get the first word. We'll allow CJ to respond, but since the question would be for you, Michael, we'll give you the last word on these questions. So,
and I'll just arbitrarily respond like CJ to some of them just to keep it fair.
Sure. Okay. I appreciate it, guys. So to the audience, thanks for your questions. A ton of super stickers came in. Thank you so much, guys, for the support. Jamie, looks like you're the super sticker master tonight. I appreciate all the support. Okay, let's get right to the first question here that came in about an hour and 20 minutes ago from Praise I Am That I Am Apologetic. So his question is for Michael. He says, CJ's worldview has moral restraints. In brackets, he puts temperance. Moral restraints objectively. What moral restraints can Michael appeal to? If not, doesn't that show CJ's morality is superior?
Thanks for that. And Praise, nice to talk to you again. The last time he and I interacted was, I think, on Modern Day Debate. Wasn't that with you, CJ? Can't remember.
No, actually, I don't think it was.
Oh, okay. Oops, sorry. Anyway, Praise, thanks for the question. Yeah. So, like I said before, my moral foundation is well-being, and it does exactly that. If you approach something from the perspective of well-being, then it does impose restraint, but there has to be buy-in, right? I have to give a damn about your well-being, and you have to give a damn about mine.
Okay, I appreciate that response, Michael. I appreciate the question. Praise. CJ, if you had a couple words or a response to that, go ahead.
Yeah, I would say I do think that Michael's answer to this, to the foundation question in particular, while I don't agree with it, it does in this particular example provide a good explanation. If something restricts one's well-being without actually benefiting others' well-being in a greater capacity, that would clearly contradict his worldview, if I understand it correctly. And that's a restraint. That would restrain you in certain elements of your life. I don't think it would restrain you in the same way that Christianity might, as far as like maybe drugs, alcohol, pornography, things like that are concerned. But it might. Maybe I'm just misinterpreting that, but nonetheless.
Okay, I appreciate that, CJ. And of course, the question was for you, Michael, so you can have the last word there.
There's nothing more to say. Let's go on to the next one. Let's try to jam in more questions.
I appreciate it, guys. I appreciate it. So here's a super chat from Jamie Russell. Thanks so much for the super chat, Jamie. Actually, this looks like it's a question for both, so we'll have some fun with it. His question is, why are the 10 commandments not sufficient in principle? What is missing for Michael? And why is he wrong if he is for the synagogue? So maybe we'll start with Michael, since the first half is for you, and then we'll throw it over to CJ.
Right. So I think I addressed this in my opening, actually, in kind of addressing things that were conspicuous by their absence. So slavery, protecting children, treating women equally, things like that.
CJ, go ahead.
Yeah, and I would argue, while I think that everything that is necessary for proper ethics is found in the Torah, I do also believe that it is pointing towards the ultimate completion of ethics, which is Christ. And also, I do think that the 10 Commandments by themselves are meant to stand the test of time in a way that perhaps certain things like slavery laws might not be able to.
Okay, well, I appreciate the question in the super chat, Jamie, and I appreciate the answers, gentlemen. So, a super chat comes in from Logical, Plausible, Probable. Not a question, just he's letting us know that he's got a live interview with Christianity Cross-Examined author Dr. Kenneth Samples tonight. Look for link in the chat. I believe that's at 8. John, if you want to specify in the chat, but I appreciate the support in the super chat. So let's get right to this.
Hello, John.
Michael and John, best buds. So I appreciate that. And yeah, you guys have had a couple debates, right, Michael? Okay, actually, let me see here, because it looks like I got a question that just came in that I can at least pop on screen. We can read it together. Let's see. So the Maverick SFT question for Michael. If promoting the concept of God and divine justice without religion enhances well-being due to an additional deterrent against immorality, are you immoral for promoting atheism?
In and of itself, no, because atheism is an answer to a single question. You can't, Christopher Hitchens addressed this well in a debate that he did. He said, I say I'm an atheist. You can't tell anything else about me. You know nothing about my politics or how I treat my wife or anything else. It's an answer to a single question, so it's got nothing to do with it.
Okay, thank you, Michael. CJ, did you have a quick comment on that?
I do think ultimately that the answer, when you answer no to the God question, it does, like I said earlier, kind of lead you to a flawed morality eventually. But I would, it's hard to get specific about that unless you're just fleshing out, one specific ethical system. And obviously we don't have enough time for that.
All right, awesome. Michael, did you want me to go on to the next question? Or did you,
okay. Sure. Yeah, just go on to the next one. Yeah,
sure. Okay, I appreciate it. So let's see here. Another question from Praise I Am That I Am Apologetic. So I appreciate it. Question for you again, Michael. He says, can Michael know committing murder is wrong, or can he only believe murder is wrong? The 10 Commandments make it clear murder is absolutely wrong epistemologically.
Sure. Yeah. So under the within the philosophical principle of fallibilism, given that I can have knowledge without absolute certainty, yeah, I believe that. And I can know that, and I don't have to appeal to a higher authority for it either.
Okay, I appreciate that. CJ, did you want a quick response or move on to the next question here?
We can just move on, honestly.
Okay. Here's a question from What's the Takeaway? Thank you for your question. Question again for you, Mike. So once again, thanks for being a good sport. He says, does Mike know what a value hierarchy is? What sits at the top of his and why?
So I'm assuming that value hierarchy would be the same as Maslow's hierarchy of needs, so a pyramid. Now I don't know whether this person means that the primary one is at the top or the base is at the bottom of the foundation. So I'm not 100% sure on that one, but and I guess I'll just say it again. My moral / ethical foundation is well-being.
Okay, I appreciate that. Yeah, go ahead, CJ.
I would just briefly comment just to say that I think that kind of explains why certain things, even though they would be absolutely wrong, could still potentially be justified, right? And that's why I always give the number example, because numbers are an obvious hierarchy, right? Because their values are inherent to themselves. 1 is just objectively more valuable than 2, right? There's just that doesn't mean there's no objective value to 1 and that it's not a number. It just means that 2 is greater in quantity. And likewise, I think when you look at your values, there are certain things which have greater value than others as far as laws and morals are concerned.
All right. Well, thank you.
I think I will just add my last
tip
to that one.
Go ahead, Michael.
That here again, CJ, what you've said is that there are these ultimate standards, asterisks, some conditions may apply. Right? So it's like it's ultimate, maybe not.
Awesome. Okay, I appreciate it, gentlemen. So this question, it it's not specifying somebody. I think it might be you, Mike. The question is, which moral principle / command is missing from the Decalogue?
Oh, well, I think I gave like 5. So I don't think I need to say them again.
And I'm looking at when this question came in, and it might be okay. No, that's understandable. So why don't we go right to this question here? Once again, believe it or not, Michael, it is for you. So,
shocker.
Question from Awaken Humanity. Thank you for your.
You got some amazing names for your people that are here.
Yeah, I don't personally name them, but so we've got Awaken Humanity. So thanks for your question. The question is, does Michael give the same right or honor to a child in the womb as one who has been born, or is there a double standard? Go ahead, Mike.
Oh, it goes right to a hot button topic.
I realized that as I was reading.
Yeah,
I was like,
it's totally fine. This will have your live chat explode with words like hypocrite. So I believe that. So I am, and I think actually I said this in one of the debates with John. So he's probably already rolling his eyes. I am pro-life. My pro-life, I believe life is precious and should be protected. My pro-life stance is only overruled by my pro-choice stance, in that bodily autonomy for the autonomous being has to be the end of it, has to be the stopping point. And fetuses in the womb are not autonomous.
I appreciate the question and the response, Mike. CJ, if you had a quick response as well, go ahead.
I would just say that, obviously personal belief, but it is a debate. That would be, I guess, one of the examples of where I think the foundation has led you to a false conclusion. Of course, I would consider myself to be pretty radically pro-life. So there's also that to be considered.
Rape and incest? Still no abortion?
I would be willing to talk about it if and only if the person talking to me would agree that the other 99% should be illegal. If the other person will not, then I will not concede either and say that they all need to be illegal. But if one is willing to be on,
and I've heard that before. It's true. It is an outlier, right? The cases where abortions are performed because of rape and incest are incredibly low. Granted, and I've heard that argument made before. So I think it's a valid talking point that we could talk about later for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, great dialogue, gentlemen. Once again, thanks for keeping a deep question, oftentimes controversial question, respectful, and maybe we can discuss it more in round 2. I know I'm excited for that debate. So let's get right to this one, and we'll start winding it down as we're coming up at the 2-hour mark, gentlemen. And I know there are some after shows. So this question from the Maverick SFT, question for Michael. By denying God exists and no penalties after death, aren't you allowing those who can avoid human justice due to loopholes, money, power, etc., reason to believe they avoid justice?
Yeah, it's interesting. There are lots of people. I think everyone has likely been wronged in a way where they're like, and maybe that person just got away with it, right? And it's an incredibly emotional issue to say, well, if God doesn't exist, that means Hitler, he just got away with it, and Pol Pot, and David Koresh, and all and Jim Jones, and all these other people who've done horrendous things, they just got away with it. Don't you want there to be justice? Sure, but it almost sounds like a backhanded Pascal's wager. Right? Like it's better to hope that a God exists, then there'll be justice. But that doesn't make it true, unfortunately.
I appreciate it, Mike. And CJ, if you wanted a quick response, go ahead.
Well, it is interesting. I would agree that the fact that it would be better doesn't make it true. But I would say that I think that it does seemingly make more sense philosophically, in my opinion, that if morals are actually set in stone by, something, that something would have the ability to enforce its morals. It just seems logical to me.
Okay, gentlemen, great responses. And looks like we've got one more question. So we did it. Thanks to the both of you. We actually did get through all the questions. So this is awesome. Last question is, surprise, surprise for you, Michael. How can you account for supererogatory acts? Hopefully I said that word correctly. Supererogatory.
I'm sorry. I'm just not smart enough to know what that word means. So if somebody can help me out.
CJ, can you help us out on that one?
Well, I do have a dictionary here, so I could probably figure it out really quick.
The mighty Google to the rescue.
The mighty Google. The questioner, if he's in the chat, you can maybe try and clarify that one if you'd like to.
And thanks for showing how not smart I am.
Well, none of us knew what it meant. So unless he meant super derogatory.
Oh, I don't know. I may need the question.
Well, hey, is it one word? Because I did just find a word that says supererogatory with an R.
Supererogatory.
Yes. So it's super. Oh, man, I don't even know if I'm saying this right. Supererogatory.
Is the questioner still in the chat?
I think this is what it means. So here's a clarification: acts that go beyond obligation.
Yeah, that is what the word I just found.
So could I get the question repeated, please?
Yes. So praise, thanks for showing all three of us that we've got a new word to learn here. So let me go back to this question. How can you account for supererogatory acts? And that word means acts that go beyond obligation. So,
given the definition, easy, empathy.
All right, awesome.
That's it.
Easy enough. CJ, since it's the last question, you can have a couple comments there too if you'd like to.
Yeah, I would say that I do agree, actually, because in fact, even animals have acts that one would consider to be beyond obligation. So clearly empathy and emotion has something to do with it. The only difference, I think, is whereas from a Christian worldview, acts without obligation, I don't know, they might not be. I don't even know if there are acts without obligation under a Christian worldview, if I'm being honest.
Don't you believe in altruism?
That's kind of what I mean, though, right? Like, I don't know if it's not an obligation, because one could argue it is an obligation for the Christian to be altruistic. You know what I mean? In which case, I don't know. It's a weird thing to talk about, but nonetheless, I would at least say that I think there's a certain grounding for sure in the Christian worldview there, which, perhaps Michael could, even if he had more time, explain better. I don't know.
Well, gentlemen, great job this afternoon. I was close to saying tonight, because typically that's when we hold the debate. So I like having a debate in the afternoon. Maybe we can do the same thing for the round 2. 2 hours has flown by. You guys honestly kept this very cordial, professional, and a ton of fun to listen to. This was a really good debate. So I want to hand it to you guys for just some final words. You can plug your channels, or, CJ, I know you've got an after show, I think, immediately following this debate. So, thanks to the both of you for giving us your time for this afternoon's important debate. And some final words, gentlemen?
I'll let you have the last word, CJ. All I would say is that given all the questions, there's a ton of Christians that are sitting in the chat. And I'd love to invite each and every one of you to the podcast. CJ can vouch for the fact that we keep it clean when there's a Christian on, out of respect, so that you can share this with people you want to have listened to the discussion. And you never get muted, you never get edited, and you get at least 50% of the time. So I think we can have more discussions and keep the lines of communication open. So you can email me, theca@rogers.com, and that email, I'm sure Standing put that in the description. So it's perfect. And that's all. CJ, take it away, brother.
Yeah. I'll just say, so first off, just want to say, I actually noticed it's on the screen now. I am going to do an open mic after show after this. It's scheduled for an hour out, but I was just wanted to give myself time. So it's not going to be an hour out. It'll be probably 25 minutes, honestly. But nonetheless, I'm going to go ahead and do that. So Standing, you're invited. Michael, you're invited. Anybody else wants to show up, everybody's invited. I do have rules and you'll have to read them, but the rules don't really apply to the two of you. So there's no reason to give them out right now.
Sadly, I can't make it. I wish I could, but I won't be able to. But so you guys can talk about me. It'll be great. It'll be great.
Excuse me. So I'll just say, thanks everybody and shalom. And I appreciate you guys. Definitely check me out at TheCynicogue. If you're interested in my apologetics, if you thought I did a good job, go over there and subscribe. If you don't think that I did a good job, go over there and just, try to get me to go in a hole somewhere and cry myself to sleep. Whatever you want to do. I'm obviously messing, but I appreciate you guys. And anybody we'll see over there, we'll see over there. God bless.
Yeah,
God bless. You guys did a great job. And judging by how this discussion went, definitely check out Michael's podcast. That sounds like a lot of fun, and it sounds like you've had a lot of good shows. A couple of them I'm definitely going to check out. And same thing with CJ. Go check out his channels and go join the after show. Give your opinion, your thoughts in terms of this debate. Definitely a debate to remember. So everybody in the chat, thank you so much for your questions. Thanks to the debaters once again for giving us your time. And we'll see you over at the after show. Standing for Truth is out.
Cheers.